For those who don't know, my name is Brett Swarts, founder of Capital Gains Tax Solutions. So our goal today is just to try to do a little bit deeper dive on the Deferred Sales Trust from a few different perspectives. Steven and I had a vision a couple weeks ago at Hunter's IIREC conference down in Manhattan Beach to bring this to another value add for everyone at Best Ever, because we're both going to be attending. Steven was just kind of learning about the Deferred Sales Trust for the first time. And so Steven's going to be moderating, and that's his position here. I'm going to pass it over to him here in a minute. And then, of course, for those who don't know who Dan Hanford is, PassiveInvesting.com. He's one of our strategic alliances now, and he's going to be sharing it as a perspective potentially for using the Deferred Sales Trust for himself and kind of the due diligence that he's gone through. And then we have my good friend and client, Shea Pope. For those who don't know, he's out of Tennessee and also doing some deals in Alabama. And he used the Deferred Sales Trust from a practical perspective. And then Hunter Thompson, I think, is running late because he was just on a panel, and he's just so smart, and we just want him to poke holes in this. So that's the goal, is to try to mastermind, okay? And so that being said, we'll go through this, and then we'll stay around. I'll stay around for as long as you want to answer questions. And some of these guys might have to cut out a little bit early. But with that, we'll get started right now, and I'll pass it over to Mr. Steven.
All right. Thank you, Brett. Very excited to be diving in with all of you guys. Got some notes on my phone here, so if I'm looking down, that's what I'm doing. So obviously you guys are here to learn about how to not pay taxes when you exit your business or any kind of real estate property. So I'm excited because when I heard this thing, it sounds too good to be true, and I feel like this is a great opportunity for us to be able to dive in, really understand from somebody who's an expert on it, and some people who've actually been through the process of vetting this. So, we'll save some time for questions for anyone in the audience at the very end if we have some time. But I want to start out first, Brett. You talk about this Deferred Sales Trust strategy, and it sounds really great. But what is it in 3 minutes?
Yeah, in 3 minutes. We can do that. I've done it in shorter time periods. So
that's what.
Ready? Go. So it's an installment sale, right? And so, for example, someone might own this hotel, and imagine you owned it free and clear. They can carry back paper. We know it as a seller carryback, right? Most of us, right? And it's very, very commonly used, and CPAs know that. It's based upon IRC 453. Which goes back to 1920s, for those that are wondering. So your CPA knows. The difference is we're combining an installment sale with a business trust, not a living trust. It's a particular business trust. And when we do it in this particular order, we're able to achieve tax deferral. It's kind of like an IRA. It's kind of like a 401k. The difference is instead of having a buyer and we're financing the buyer, we're going to finance the trust. And so there's 3 parties in every transaction. And what's happening is the seller is becoming a lender. So they're trading ownership hat for a lender hat, okay? That's step 1. And they're financing the trust, and the trust is going ahead and selling it to the ultimate buyer. And what's left is this pool of money, the net proceeds in the trust, and we've changed the nature of ownership to lendership. Is that pretty good?
That was the shortest explanation I've ever heard you say, and that was phenomenal. That was really good. I think that really helps us kind of understand what we're working with. And so what are the different type of opportunities or uses that someone might say, hey, I'm going to use a Deferred Sales Trust for this instance?
Yes, so the number one we found is businesses, because businesses do not qualify for 1031 exchanges, as well as cryptocurrency. We feel those are the 2 best opportunities because we have some all-time highs, not only in the stock market, but the cryptocurrency market, as well as a lot of baby boomers that are looking to exit. In fact, there's about $32 trillion over the next 18 years, and it's known as the largest wealth transfer in the history of the planet that's happening right now. Okay, and so 50% of all of America's net worth is tied to commercial real estate, private equity, which is businesses, okay, and what's the third one? And the third one is high-end primary homes, okay? So these 3 asset types are illiquid assets that baby boomers want to exit, but they feel trapped by the capital gains tax, which is typically 30 to 50%. So those are the main ones, but we particularly believe that cryptocurrency right now is the best opportunity for the commercial real estate world to serve the cryptocurrency owners, millionaires, that want to exit tax deferred because there's no 1031 option. And then, of course, there's investment real estate for those like us who are forced by the 1031 exchange and want an alternative and don't want to overpay.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I want to go to some of the other panelists. Dan, kind of introduce yourself, and what was it that led you to looking at this as a potential option of something that you'd want to do?
Sure. So the main reason why I was looking into it was from a business transaction perspective, because I am actually in the process right now of selling one of my businesses that has nothing to do with real estate at all. And that was going to have a large win, if you will, with that sale of that transaction, and wanted to figure out a way to move it into real estate and also reduce the taxable liability. And that's really one of the main reasons why I reached out to Brett and started down this due diligence process. But I'm curious in the crowd right now, after he said that probably a minute and a half on what a DST is, the Deferred Sales Trust, how many of you in here were still like, you're going to have to explain that one more time to me? Because to me, I had to hear it like at least probably 3 or 4 times. And Brett and I have had phone calls after phone calls. I'm like, all right, it finally sunk in, right? So if you're like that, just hang on, because it does take a little bit of time, then eventually it will click. So
Repetition. And then Shea, you've done this.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about what was why were you looking at Deferred Sales Trust, and how did that process start for you?
Yeah, I was driving, listening to the Best Ever podcast. Brett was a guest. Had never talked to Brett. Honestly, had not listened to the Best Ever podcast very much. So it's funny, like one of the first episodes I ever listened to got me into the DST, essentially. Like Dan, I had 4 businesses at the time as I'm listening to. I'm not in real estate, was not in construction at the time. And similar to kind of the hands going up in the room that I just saw a second ago, I've got a friend of mine that now lives in Arkansas. He was selling a $4 million business. And I said, hey, can you look into this DST thing? Because, I think I'm good at due diligence, but he's like super, one of my best friends, super into the weeds. So that for me, really just wanting to, hey, my partner and I, by the way, I'm a partner at the Graceway Group in Nashville. We're a multifamily construction developer. We do ground up construction. So that business had just started right literally the month that I listened to the podcast. Mm-hmm. So my wheels started spinning of like, hey, I'm going into this real estate construction company. I've got these other non-real estate construction businesses that I've been in for 15 years. This is kind of creative. Is it legal? And then maybe, talk later, like bringing in my resources that my businesses were using from a CPA and legal standpoint. We kind of went down that path.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really helpful. And one of the things the reason why I was looking at it is because I have a number of clients that are doing 1031 exchanges or selling businesses, and they're looking for ways to essentially defer or eliminate taxes at sale. And we had a deal that is going to close next week, and we were not sure if we were going to be able to get it closed before these 1031 exchange dollars were going to expire. And so there was a big look around, well, what are the different options? What happens if we go past that window? The day that the 1031 expires, there's absolutely nothing you can do after that. So once that happens, you're done, it's over. So this was a viable option. When I first heard Brett talk about it, I thought, no, like there's got to be a catch there. This sounds too simple. It's extremely complicated when he explains it at first, but what it really comes down to is there's an installment sale where you essentially say, hey, I'm going to sell something, but I'm going to take payments for it. So anyone who's been in creative real estate or talked about buying property on terms, like we know about installment sale. Okay, so we can wrap our head around that. And then you're placing that into a trust that you don't own, you don't control. So the government essentially says it's not yours, right? You might be the other trustee on it. But what are the other pieces that go into making this deferred sales trust a viable option for people to defer or eliminate those taxes or push them off to a future date?
Yeah, so again, it's the tax law of IRC 453, which is an installment sale, which we can't pay taxes on what we haven't received, right? And so as long as it's not actual or constructive receipt, it's in a deferral state. By the way, that's how a 1031 works as well, right? You have a third-party qualified intermediary where the funds go. So instead of going to your personal hands, it's in a deferral state. It's how an IRA works. It's how a 401k works. These are all kind of like a deferred sales trust. The bigger question I think to ask is this: why would the IRS allow this? Like, what's in it for them? Well, it's a study of macroeconomics that states that if we can get money flowing and incentivize business owners and cryptocurrency owners and highly appreciated primary homeowners to sell assets that are highly appreciated and infuse the capital into businesses or stock market or real estate, that actually creates more jobs. And I'll give you a couple case studies for this, right? We have a client, we sold an $8.3 million primary home in Palo Alto. And he had owned this for a lot of years. He had raised 6 kids. His kids are gone. And he's literally not going to be able to sell because he has about $1 million liability. So the real estate agent doesn't get paid. Escrow doesn't get paid. There's not a new family coming in there, right? There's all of these things that would have happened if it wasn't for the Deferred Sales Trust. So instead of not selling, he was able to infuse that capital into the stock market. That's what he was really comfortable with, and people are comfortable with different things. And that creates more jobs, right? That's why the 1031 exchange, by the way, thank goodness it's still around, and it sounds like it's off the chopping block, right? That's why it's a good thing to incentivize highly appreciated asset owners to trade, to do deals, okay? So that's why, by the way, the IRS has looked at this about a dozen times. There's been thousands of closes, over billions under management, okay? But it is something that people just don't know how to do until they start to talk and walk through it on a deal-by-deal basis. So to answer the question, Steven?
Yeah, I think that answers it. What I'd love for each of you guys to do is to scoot over one chair. So I'm a little bit closer to you guys because our other guy, apparently he decided to...
He forgot about it.
Yeah.
He deferred his answers.
Yeah, he deferred participation. All right, so Dan, you've got a business that you're selling, so it's exactly the type of opportunity that fits well into the Deferred Sales Trust. And you had your team, I'm sure, kind of dive in. What was it that you were looking for to understand if it was something that was legit? And then what did you find as you were starting to kind of dive deeper into that process?
Yeah. So I don't know if I can actually explain all the different things that we've actually learned, because I think on the phone call that we had with my team I have 2 CPAs. One's my personal CPA, one's a business CPA. And then I also had our tax attorney, and all had phone calls to try to make sure that what was happening was, again, legal and legitimate and all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to make sure that they heard about it and could give me some advice on it as well. And so after that phone call, they gave us a green light saying, hey, here's a few things that I think would be great. And really the downside there wasn't much of a downside from that perspective. There are a few things that you have to make sure that you do the right way along the process, and that's where your team came in to kind of help out with some of those legal aspects of it. But for us, the biggest thing was trying to figure out how to keep more of the money that we were making with the sale of the transaction. So it's a large 8-figure transaction that's supposed to occur, and I didn't want to have to be paying 40% in taxes or whatever to the government in that. So being able to find an opportunity like this, which when you're selling a business, I don't really know of any other solutions that's available to really defer those taxes down the road. So when you're selling a business, and real estate, it's different, right? There's 1031s into other assets. There's also 1031s into another DST, which is the Delaware Statutory Trust, not to be confused with this DST. But those are, from a business perspective, it's a great opportunity. And I think that my biggest concerns were trying to figure out the control but not control of the trust itself, because it's a big amount of money to just stick in a trust that you don't have any control over.
So how did you overcome that? How did you overcome that feeling where you're in a position, you're going to put 8-figure plus into a trust that you don't control, that you do control?
Well, I will say that it's still one of those things that I'm still trying to get over, even though I'm confident in it. But I think the biggest thing is that his company, his team is the one who's helping with to be the trustee, if you will. So, and he's like, hey, you just let us know kind of what we're going to do. And if I'm saying anything I shouldn't say, just feel free to let me know. But you basically just we communicate. Hey, I have this asset. Their team looks at it, vets it, and then they'll invest it for you.
Yeah. So let me address that, right? So it's tough because we're used to being owners of assets, which means it's unilateral control, right? I can go to a bank, and if I had 10 million in the bank, I can say, hey, give me the money, right? In the sense here, Dan is trading ownership, unilateral control, for a secured lender. Guess who are the wealthiest in the world? Bankers. Are they concerned that if they lend money, they're not to be able to have protections? In fact, there's arguments to be made that you actually have more rights and protections as a lender, as a secured lender, over just ownership. And so while Dan is by the way, it's a single entity trust that only does business with Dan and his wife, and they have to approve of everything, the movement of the funds, the investment of the funds, just kind of like a bank would do to say, hey, I'll lend you on this hotel here, but you're going to have fire insurance. You're going to have to follow these different things. You're going to have to do these different reporting, and you have to pay back this loan, or we can foreclose and take back the assets, right? The bigger question is how and where are the funds secured and how can they be protected in that sense, right? And that's where what I really find is really valuable is Dan is a GP and he's an expert in commercial real estate. And up to 80% of the funds the next day can go into an LLC with him, of which he is the owner. He's trading his lendership hat to an ownership. We call it lendership. And now he has unilateral control over that LLC. Now he has a partner in the trust and he has to pay back the trust based upon the partnership. It's typically about an 80-20 split. But he's running that into his own deals again, up to 80. That's the next day. In fact, I think, Shea, that would be a good thing for you to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, I echo everything Dan said. I mean, in my house, my wife really was the only person that mattered ultimately of like the skepticism. And really for her, the one thing it came down to is who's authorizing this when the money transfers? Is it just going to be a guy like Brett, a gal, that's managing the trust? Who's going to have that control? So we worked through that. And I mean, the money that comes in and out, there are signatories, my wife and I, within that give us peace of mind. So our deal was not 8 figures, it was 7, but we had been in that business for 15 years. Those 2 businesses, she had been in those businesses too. So like we really, for us, you would ask like what was important to us. So for me, I'm a trust but verify guy. In finding those people that could really pick this apart. And I mean, look, even to this day, I'm still trust but verify on the way the trust has come into these various businesses that I own as a lender. And my Nashville CPAs who had done our business returns for 15 years, they were very skeptical originally. And I would even say truthfully until the first full year, when they saw the installment sale and everything was reported from the trust, they got to apply all the bases and just double check everything. That was like, okay, so there was a piece one at the consummation of doing the deal, right? My CPAs had signed off, my lawyers had signed off, but it really was going through a couple years ago, the first tax season, where I was like, okay, so. And we've done, to your question, just briefly, so Graceway Group did their first development in Clarksville. So my partner and I, through Graceway, own that development, separate LLC. So the trust came in at a minority position, and then the trust is getting paid a return per month on that capital in the deal.
Perfect.
Yep.
I'll add 2 more things too as well. We also have a securities professional, and the trustee can't be the financial advisor. And we work with some of the best, we think, in the U.S. And is a story I talked about David Young briefly towards the end of my conversation. And it's one thing for me to say. My background is Marcus Millchap, 1031 exchange broker, right? Grew up in the real estate industry, but it's another thing for someone like a David Young who ran with a guy named Bill Gross. And for those who don't know who that is, he's kind of like a Mark Cuban of the financial advising industry. And some of you know who that is. And so the point of all of this is Mr. David Young did a 2-year due diligence with his legal team. He can manage the money. If Dan wanted him to manage the money, he can manage the money. And this guy manages some of the biggest wealth in the world. But not only all of that, but he put his name on this, and he's a part of the inner circle of the Deferred Sales Trust financial advisors. And so what we always say is if it's good enough for David Young and his legal team after 2 years of due diligence, not that we don't want to bring everyone else in, is it good enough for me, for Steven, for Dan, for Shea, for you? And we want to invite people in. What we find, though, is sometimes people are working with CPAs and professionals who've helped them for 10 or 20, 30 years go from 0 to $1 million, 1 to 10 million, and they've helped 10 million to 50 million, and they've helped them get there. But just because they helped you get there doesn't mean they know what we know. And what we have is proprietary, it's protected, and it's been tested and tried with the IRS, thousands of closes. And the key is being humble enough to say, am I missing something? Is there something else out there? And so I appreciate what Dan did is he looked at it, and same thing with Shea. Then they had their CPAs come in, and it was a slow process of getting to know us, the banks, the financial advisors, all of that collectively to make a good decision.
So let's get a raise of hands. Who has a very clear, raise them high, who has a really clear understanding of what a DST is or a Deferred Sales Trust? So looking around, we see a couple hands high. Who is unclear about what this vehicle is or what it is? Raise your hands high. All right, so I think there's still a little bit of confusion on the overall structure. So let's just as Dan was saying, I think it takes 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 times of hearing it. Tell us again, what's the 90-second, the 3-minute version of what this thing is and how people use it?
Perfect. This is great. Daniel, want to do it? Yeah, this is great.
Well, I think what would be helpful is for you to break down a transaction. Like, just give you an example of my business, right? Like, it's 8 figures. Just to say it's 10 million. Break it down for them. Like, what happens when that business sells on the closing table? What has to happen before the closing table? What happens at the closing table? And then what happens after?
Perfect. Okay, and we're going to do a little audience. Let's see, is it Colm, right? So imagine Colm was about to buy Dan's business for 10 million, hypothetically, and Dan's basis is 0, right? So that's the first thing to always qualify. It's a huge tax. Again, if Dan were to sell it to Colm directly, that means Colm's giving him the money, 10 million. That's taxable. The difference is we're going to form a trust, and this trust is going to be over here, and we're going to ask Colm to cooperate with Dan and I. And what Dan's going to do, he's going to sell it to me, to the trustee, our company, but it's a single entity business, just trust, okay, on an installment, 100%. Dan's not taking any cash at closing, right? So if he took 0, how much tax can he pay at 0 at closing? The answer is 0, right? Now immediately, like a simultaneous close, Colm, we don't want to finance you, okay? 10 million, get a bank loan, come with cash, we don't care. The money's going to sit here. Now watch this. If the trust bought it for 10 million, and sold it for 10 million, how much gain does the trust have? You got it, right? And if Dan hasn't taken any actual constructive receipt, how much tax does Dan owe on 0? So he's in a deferral state, okay? Now the trust is going to start to pay him back. The terms are typically 8% compounding rate of return over a 10-year period, of which he can renew every 10 years for 10 years, can pass it to his kids. Okay, and as he takes payments back, he'll pay ordinary income tax. He'll report that as a 1099. In fact, we'll give him the 1099. He'll report it to his CPA. Very simple. Okay, if he dips into principal, he'll pay capital gains tax. But it's just a deferral. It's just a deferral, right? So it's not tax avoidance. However, he might buy some real estate. He might get some depreciation. He might do some cost segregation. Those are our best friends. And he might start to take some of that cash flow and guess what? Offset in that given year. So we call it tax optimization. Answer the question?
Yeah, I think that is. Let's get another raise of hands. Who has a better understanding than they did just a minute ago, right? Really simplifies things. So, Shea, you're in a position where you've sold your business, you're now actually using these funds as a real estate investor, and which is great because if you're on the general partner side and you want to put money into your own deals, phenomenal option. If you're on the LP side and you want to put money into deals, you can still get that same depreciation. Talk about what you've done or how you've structured it so that you can actually take receipt of those dollars and put them to work in the real estate that you do.
Sure. So the trust in closing out those 2 businesses, very much like Brett just said, my interests were assigned over. So Graceway Group, the trust has come on as a minority position, commercially reasonable. So my partner on the Graceway side, we had to agree together, like, what are we willing to pay to Brett and the trust, right? Because, I can make recommendations to the trust, right? But there's got to be a little bit of a layer of ultimately, yes, we sign on all the money that's coming out, but for it to be independent, to be able to have those taxes in a deferred state, right? Brett has kind of got to say, hey, that sounds great. So we had a close to 10% return for my business that was going to charge interest. Let me say this the right way. So 9.5% is the return that my trust gets from Graceway for the development that we're doing right now, that we're closing out this year. And so I bought an option on that, okay? So what does that mean? So for it to be commercially reasonable, that 20%, right, the trust owns that. And hopefully there's a gain on that. So I purchased the right to exercise an option at a later date whenever I want to capture that gain. So I've exercised that. So
yeah, let me say it again so you can hear it again, because this is the reason I started the company right here. And it's a little bit confusing, but I want to say it again, okay? So at first, Shea is the lender, okay? So he 2.6 million was the size of his deal, okay? And it owes him the 2.6 million over 8%. He's a lender. But the trust can invest in different things. It can go into the stock market, it can go hard money lending, it can go passive investments, it can go to active. And Shea says, hey, I got this real estate development and I want to build. And as a trustee, I've got to look at it and say, that looks pretty good. Ask them some questions. And that's part of what I love to do what I do, because I'm in commercial real estate. I grew up in the development business, so it's very natural. But the trust can go into really any business investment, okay? So Shea says, I have this investment. Great. Can I JV partner with it? Yes, with the trust. Yes. So he joint venture partners with the trust. Just like if Shea said, hey, I got a deal in Alabama and Tennessee, and does anyone have the money? Put up the money. I'll do all the operations, and we'll give you a preferred return. It's all the same thing. The difference is with the trust that owes him the money. So the trust puts up a big part of the money, and it asks for a preferred return, typically about 8%, and a 20% ownership. So if the deal goes from $3 million, let's say, and it goes to $10 million, it's a $7 million gain. You got to break it up towards the partnership there. Now, if there's an option that's purchased, Shea can get up to 98% of the upside. So these are all very precise things that the tax attorney has set in place, that if we follow these guidelines, he has become the owner of an LLC in partnership with the trust. We call it the go fund yourself, but it's like riding a bike. You've probably never rode this bike before in this order, so you've got to see it on paper. We will map it out for you with the squares and the boxes and the things here. And as you ride the bike, you get comfortable with it. And that's where now we're going 100 miles an hour, never using the 1031 ever again. But you've got to spend time with us, which is what Steven told me the other day. He's like, tell people to spend time with you. And we have our mastermind every Friday. You can spend time with us with the tax attorneys as well. We don't charge any of the due diligence process, and that's a cool thing for you guys to get to know it.
Brett, one thing here. So I was thinking about one of the other advantages of the DST is you had mentioned early on that if you take some of the principal, you have to pay capital gains on that. So correct me if I'm wrong, but any time throughout the process of having this trust, if you have a family emergency or maybe you just want to go buy this fancy car and you want to tap into some of that money, you can, because there is some cash that stays liquid there, but you just pay capital gains on that, correct?
You nailed it, right? So we're going to optimize that. Dan also might have a loss in 5 years. Like let's say he does a $10 million business sale and in 5 years he has a deal that blows up and he has a $5 million capital loss. He's going to call me. We're going to talk with the CPA, and guess what we're going to do? We're probably going to liquidate $5 million in that same year and wash it out. Okay. So the key is depreciation versus cash flow, but also potential capital loss versus the capital gains that you can take in that given year. So again, he's deferring it until a later date. So that's exactly right, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's huge, because what you're really saying is that you're in control of when you're going to pay those taxes. So you could kind of work through the entire, 10-year installment plan, and you can re-up, and you can keep doing that. You can keep rolling exactly as you're going. But if Dan, he's in a business where he's creating a lot of depreciation, he's a general partner. Even if you're a limited partner, you're going to create a lot of depreciation. There could be a year where it makes sense to cash more out than another year. But one thing I wanted to point out that I think you were saying that is a little bit next level sophisticated. It sounded like you created an option to buy back the 20% so that the trust would not profit at some outrageous level, and that would come back to the company. You paid some kind of reasonable market rate for that option, and then now you're able to leverage that money in your company and continue to kind of do that over and over. Is that right? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So my wife, Danielle, and I, one of the things going into the real estate development world, we're talking to all these references, okay? So for me, again, trust but verify, we're talking to all these real estate developers, huge gains. Talked to a guy in the Northeast that had a $45 million exit on a business. And so we're authenticating with these couples. Like y'all saw on the slide deck, Dave, he sold the apartment complex for $7 million. So for me, one of the things I was very skeptical about was on the gains that I have, am I just going to be able to go to this trust like a bank and just get money loaned to me? Because if that's the case, then that's a problem for me, to be honest with you. So once I heard that there were other referrals that were in the development world, and then I understood about the options and some of the way that they were getting a return back to the trust, but they were actually able to bring it on almost like as a lender, well, then I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Because ultimately, I know I have to pay these taxes. They're deferred. But for me, kind of the trick is I'm generating more taxes, 1099 each year. I've got my installment sale reported. But then, like some of the deals that we're doing right now, we're building and selling. We're not holding. So, we're going to have serious gains on this. We do have serious gains on it. And for me to be able to generate income, but then defer that as well. And the goal for me with Graceway Group, with my holdings at least, is to try to cover the taxes that I'm going to have to eventually pay and defer the new taxes until I got to pay those. That's probably as simple as I could say it. So I'd be lying if I said I knew all that at the time that I executed this trust, right? I think I knew conceptually some of it, but it is kind of like riding a bike, and for me, like one thing I'm left out at the beginning, I think anybody that's interested in this, talking to living human beings across the country on the phone and really seeing how they did it, there's so many different examples. Everybody's got their own comfortability, but Brett afforded all that to Danielle and I. But lawyers, CPAs, but here's 30 numbers, call them, do your due diligence. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, that's big. And so obviously you're selling a business, you're selling crypto, you're going through this process, you're putting it into something like this. But the reason we started talking was because we wanted to understand, hey, how can we protect these investors who've got $3 or $4 million in 1031s that could potentially fail? And so talk to us a little bit about how that process works. The money, the property's already been sold, it's in a 1031 intermediary. How does the Deferred Sales Trust come into the conversation, and how does that work?
Yeah, great question. And we're saving 1031 exchanges all the time, okay? And the neat part about it, the first thing to understand is, again, constructive receipt. If the funds go to you personally, it's over. Right? Just like if you don't set up a 1031 exchange at the close of escrow and you mistakenly, went to my account, it's over, right? So you've got to set it up prior to. Same thing too. While the funds are at the qualified intermediary, it's in a deferral state until and if you perfect the exchange, and then it's deferral again. Or you default into a deferred sales trust. So this is really neat because it gives you guys the ability to negotiate on your own terms and not have to feel like the seller has you, right where they want you, right? So step one is you actually literally form a trust. So we sit down with you, we go through it all, we form a trust. Step number two is we work with your exchange accommodator to amend the exchange agreement, to add language to allow this specific trust that has a specific EIN the ability to receive those funds at day 46 or day 181, depending on what you've identified and depending on the timing of the sale. So instead of the funds going to you, being taxable, it goes to the trust at closing, okay? It's as simple as that. However, most exchange accommodators, A, don't want you to know about this, or B, they don't even know about it. Although we do work with exchange accommodators that we do this all the time with, and we want to introduce you to them so that you don't feel trapped by a 1031. But that's the basic answers. A couple other things. If you've already identified, don't worry about it. We don't take one of your identifications, okay? Because we're not a property. So we're not taking away from your 1031. We're just a backup plan in case it fails, okay? Number two, if you have identified, we got to make sure we do set it up, somewhere within the 180 days so that we can default into this, right? And that's really the key. Just really be early. But for whatever reason, if you use the 1031, you don't owe us anything, right? We take all that pressure off, all of the tax planning, all of the trust formation, everything gets lined up. If your deal doesn't close, no problem. You find a 1031, we give you a high five. You found that rare gem in a value-add marketplace that's very, very competitive. Hey, we'll give you. We like that, right? But if it does fail, we're there for you.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about, Dan brought up something that I think a lot of us, if we're business owners, if we're property owners, if we've got some money, we kind of want to hold on to it. We want to have control. So what protections are in place that ensure that the trustee is going to be reasonable in our requests or the direction that we're looking to go with that capital that we've put into the trust?
Yeah, great question. And here's the good news. I'm not by myself, right? I'm not sitting on an island here. We have tax attorneys, CPA who created this, and a law firm. And I like to say it's like the three branches of the government, right? And you have each of them holding each other accountable. And in fact, the tax attorneys do not work for Capital Gains Tax Solutions because the tax attorneys cannot be the trustee. Likewise, I can't be the tax attorney. Same thing with the financial advisor. We work with financial advisors across the country. We can't be the financial advisor, and the financial advisor can't be us. So it's a team approach here, right? Where the money's there, and like the analogy we like to use, like Dan would be the CEO, I would be the COO, and the financial would be the CFO. But nothing ever moves without Dan's approval or my approval. And that's important because if it was just Dan's unilateral approval, it would be taxable. but the funds can sit in the bank and wait until Dan finds a thing, feel something comfortable. And yeah, I have to also feel comfortable with it, right? But here's the thing: most of what we do is all based upon a risk tolerance. Everything that we do, in fact, is based upon a risk tolerance questionnaire. So just like a financial advisor, if Dan were to sell at $10 million and pay $4 million of tax and show up to a financial advisor, and that financial advisor he and his wife do a risk tolerance questionnaire, it's going to score that. Based upon that, it's mathematical. We help to determine a proper allocation. My role is the trustee, though. I'm not the financial advisor. So it's a committee, I guess is a better way to put it. But ultimately, Dan, if he doesn't sign, nothing moves. But I also have to sign and approve. But I'm a friendly trustee. There's any reason for me to not want to say yes to Dan, okay? No. But do I have the legal ability to say no? Yes. And if I didn't have that, it'd be taxable, right? Or if I was related to Dan, or if I had worked for Dan, I was his best man at his wedding, or college roommate, whatever. It's too close. So there has to be this separation, and that's the role that I play as a trustee.
Hold on one second.
I was gonna ask you.
I was going to say, so this is actually something that came up when we were talking as well, because my question was, I like you, Brett. You know, I appreciate you managing my money, or at least being the trustee that helps make the decisions, and you'll be my yes man for this whole process. But what happens if you get killed on a plane crash on the way home today? Like, who at that point? Like, am I going to get another one of you, or am I just stuck at that point?
Right. Great question. So. First of all, if there's any hesitation about me or the structure, the one thing we always say to people is legally, we can set these promissory notes for shorter terms. In other words, we could do a balloon payment due in 12 months. And so for whatever reason, if it's not working out, Dan says, the loan is due. Give me the $10 million back. Or you can just renew it it's like a refinance. You can just renew it. So most are going to set it at 10 years, but if there was like that, any hesitation, first of all, we can set it for 6 months. So you only have 6 months of this potential no guy, if you want to put it that way, right? Second, okay, if I get hit by a bus, there's a succession plan in place where another trustee is presented. If for some reason it's not a great fit, there's other trustees that can be presented that are trained and certified with the tax attorneys on everything that we do. So there's never been, with the tax attorney, he'll tell you this, Campbell will tell you this, there's never been a situation where there wasn't a way to find a good fitting trustee, that fits, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, what led you to feeling comfortable being a guy who, all the concerns that you had about control, what led you to the place of saying, yeah, this is something I could do?
Well, I think going back to the control aspect of it, there's definitely a level of giving up control, but then having some of the questions. That's why those kind of questions come up about, like, well, what happens if you fall off the face of the earth? And I got to figure out where my money is and try to do something with it, right? And then having the ability to really have access to it whenever you need it, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, if you lock it up in real estate, you can't just fully liquidate it right away. So you'd have a process of getting that out, but having that ability to be able to get it out, I think, was something else that kind of helped us. Plus, there really there's not a lot of other options in business to be able to do this type of thing. Actually, there is no other option other than doing a 1031, which maybe you could talk about this a little bit. So in business, you can sell your business, and if you're a real estate professional status, then you can use the depreciation to offset some of that gain, if not all of it. But then there's also other complications that come in with managing multiple 1031s, unless you're going to buy a really large asset if you have this really huge gain. So that's one that's one thing that you and I had talked about as far as differences between an active GP going in and just selling the business and placing it all in the same year. But then if you don't place it all in the same year, you're also caught. I know it's possible you could sell your business at the end of the year, and then you have a short time frame to be able to place all that capital.
So a couple things too, and that's a great point. I'll talk about the 1031 versus the Deferred Sales Trust here, but I want to let you know that the funds go to some of the biggest banks and biggest institutions in the world. TD Ameritrade, Charles Schwab is our main one, okay? And so this is a securities professional. Just as if Dan sold, paid the tax, and we have one of our new strategic alliances, Keith here, and he's a financial professional, okay? There's a lot of places in place to keep those funds protected. There's no less protection because Dan uses a trustee with the trust. In fact, I would argue there's extra layers of protection because they're going to check with me and Dan to make sure that these wires are going where they should be going. Okay, there's a couple sets of eyes and ears there. So I'm not sitting at home pressing the red button for $10 million to go to Mexico. Right? There's a financial advisor in place. There's also another third-party bank in place, okay, of which we can provide what's called deposit account control agreement. For those who aren't familiar with that, basically they're looking at physical signatures on the movement of funds. So ultra high net worth clients, and this has been done from people that are billionaires, okay, so it's been tested and tried, it's been done. And we have that in place. So there's no less protection there. Even if I wanted to be a bad guy, I don't have the ability just to move the funds without Dan's approval. Okay, number two, the funds are never commingled with any other trust accounts. They're also never commingled with my business accounts or my personal accounts, right? So although I'm the trustee of the trust and he's a secured lender, it's a single entity business trust that we have all these protections in place. So hopefully that answers it. In regards to the 1031 exchange with the business, what I found is it's very complicated and it's short time period, and oftentimes it doesn't give the ability to actually execute it on a way that what you're looking to do, right? So I would think the first thing to clarify is what is Dan trying to do? Is he trying to buy another business, or is he trying to go into hard money lending or ground up development or real estate? So it's clarifying your wealth plan, like where do you want the funds? Where do you want to invest? Okay, so how do we design the trust in a way that's tax deferred to do exactly what you're going to do with the full amount versus a lesser amount, right? But I've never done that particular one with the business one. I've only done 1031 exchanges with investment property, so I can't necessarily speak to that aspect of it. But what I can tell you is that the 1031 exchange versus the deferred sales trust, there's just timing, no timing restrictions, right? You don't have to go like kind, right? You also can move funds outside the taxable estate, which is, I think, one of the big things for Dan, because he's making and building wealth at a rapid pace. So fast forward, we did a deal in Colorado Springs, by the way, $5 million exit for a client that's worth $25 million, and we exited that $5 million outside their taxable estate in one day without giving it away to charity, without having to buy life insurance. Okay, very sophisticated, smart real estate family that has never really done any estate planning per se. And so those are clients of mine, and we can talk to them. So those would be some of the main reasons why you'd use the Deferred Sales Trust for estate planning versus just the 1031 exchange, which is just capital gains tax.
So we got a few minutes left. Let's get down to brass tacks. I mean, how much does this thing cost? How is it set up? What's the risk that goes into setting one of these up? Like, how much is it going to cost me to go and, go through this process to figure out if this is right for me?
Yeah, let's talk fees. So let's imagine it's a $1 million cryptocurrency sale. Just to keep it really simple, $1 million. You're going to pay the first fee is to the tax attorney. It's 1.5%. Okay, it's $15,000. It's on the gross asset sales price. Okay, recurring fees are about 1.85 to 2% on a recurring basis, and that includes the financial advisor, by the way, typically, right? Depending on how and where the funds are invested, it's about 1.85 to 2%. No matter if that's passive or active, whether that's with you in a deal or just with the stockbroker or financial advisor, it's about that range. Although the goal is to return 8%, typically, a compounding rate of return net of those fees, right? So if you put $1 million in today, it turns into $2 million in about 9 years, right? Ideally, that would be about a 7%. It's a rule of 72. That would be net of fees, and the money would be doubled, or you've taken those payments, and then you can renew for another 10 years. So that's why our minimum is $1 million net proceeds, $1 million gain, because the smaller the deal, the less the liability, the less the return on investment makes for you.
Going back to the kind of legacy wealth building aspect of this and moving some of your net worth out of your estate and putting it into the trust. One of the downsides, which this is obviously we talk about really good things, but let's talk about one of the disadvantages here for just a moment. And maybe you can talk through why it still might not be as bad of a disadvantage, is with a 1031, if you are 1031 exchanging all along the way and then you pass away, then your kids have a step up in basis to the current value of the property at that time, but in a trust it does not. Is that correct?
So yes, let's talk about that, right? So correct, in a traditional installment sale, if the trust passes, kids can step into shoes. It's not a stepped up basis situation where you can exit capital gains tax free. But what I'm referring to is estate tax. And that's the big 40% elephant in the room, that even if Dan has $100 million net worth at closing, or when you die, okay? The stepped up basis, at closing of your life.
Closing.
You get the stepped up basis, but what the government's going to say is, hey, what's your total net worth? We don't care about your capital gains tax. You're worth $100 million. How much is inside the taxable estate? So in other words, capital gains tax on the stepped up basis has nothing to do with estate tax. And that's the biggest part of the wealth transfer, the $32 trillion. And for those that are ultra high net worth, 22 million or more, married, or 12 million single, although those are set to expire in about 2 years and cut in half. But if you're worth 22 million, you're good right now, and you pass away, it's all exempt. If you're single and you're married, if you're single and 12 million or less, you're exempt, you're good. But as soon as you start getting to the ultra high net worth, you got to start worrying about estate tax planning, right? And you can give it to charity, which is great, right? You can also buy a bunch of life insurance, which a lot of real estate people and we don't like. You can also try to do some family limited partnerships and some planning, some gifting. But most of the ultra high net worth individuals, they're running out of time. They don't have enough kids, and they don't want to buy a bunch of life insurance. So upon exit right now, we can move the funds outside the taxable estate, and it's going to eliminate that 40% immediately.
Yeah, pretty good. Right. I mean, my wife and I have been dealing with this estate planning stuff for quite some time now, because it does create a liquidity problem when you die, when you're above that 24 million, and being able to move some of that out is great. If the kids ever wanted to sell, though, that's really where the kicker is, because they're going to still have that capital gain if they wanted to pull money out of the trust at that time too.
So we're getting into a little bit of the NDA phase here, and I can't say certain things on camera right now, but what I will say is it's not in a traditional installment sale, the one that we'll be using for ultra high net worth individuals that are wanting to exit in a way that's going to be, let's say, capital gains tax friendly. Short answer is, as you receive payments from this particular trust, which is it's no longer IRC 453, you're going to be paying capital gains tax on your lifetime, okay? But upon your death, okay? Okay, upon your closing, the ultimate closing act, right? They're going to inherit it in a way that's it's estate tax free and actually capital gains tax free. Okay, and that's a big statement, and I want you guys to come and explore that with us. But I got to be careful what I say without NDAs. That's all I'm going to say on that.
So obviously, there's a lot of upside. And it's essentially 2% a year in order to avoid paying 30 or 40% in potential taxes. What are some other downsides that you've seen, Shea, or that you've seen, Dan, looking into this? I'd love to hear from you guys. You've actually been in, you've got your hands dirty on it, and I feel like out of anybody, you really understand. Well, what's the upside, what's the downside?
I can speak to that. I mean, a con for me has just been it's complex. You know, when I say complex, it's harder than just paying the taxes, right? So I mean, in my life, anytime I add complexity, right, you know, that's just a practical challenge. So, but the complexity, the pros outweigh the negatives for me on that. I think a pro for me is just the flexibility I've got with the business on the real estate development side. Mm-hmm. The pro would be, you know, any other businesses that I've got right now that I want to potentially exit from, you know, that is already in place, right? So I mean, there's a lot of creativity that comes with that. That's a big pro for me. But yeah, I would say the negative is you know, it was more complex than what I was going to do before I listened to that podcast. You know? And so, but I'm glad I did it. Trying to think of any other cons that stand out. I mean, you know, I've been a business owner for almost 20 years. Having other people that you've got to talk to about decisions outside of just normal partnerships, you know, that's something that, just like the buddy I was telling you about that had to vet this for he and his wife, he's the same way. Like, you know, you don't like to have to, I think you had kind of mentioned a version of this earlier, Dan, like, you know, I like kind of doing my own thing, right, to a point. So you're really entrusting a trustee, but like, look, I mean, I've got view access to everything that we're doing. I mean, a lot of the people that are here, like, we're passively invested with, not just active deals that I'm on. So, I mean, that's a pro too. Like, I see the money. I see where it is. If I did not see it, there would be there'd be a problem. Yeah. So those are pros and cons for me.
That's great.
One of the things I think would be good for you to talk about as well, because I've already mentioned my biggest con, which we've kind of dissected a little bit at my closing and everything. But one of the things I think would be helpful is, I mean, I'm sure you're thinking that was not going to hopefully be your last, you know, business sale that you might want to use this with. Is this something that you have to pay, you know, multiple fees to have? You have to have, like, you know, 10 of these if you have 10 assets that sell or whatever. Can you put it all in the same trust?
Yes, you can. And by the way, as soon as you go over $1 million, it drops from 1.5 to 1.25 on the one-time fee with the tax attorneys. And then if it's like a $100 million deal, we're working on an NFT deal right now. There is some room there. I cannot negotiate for my business partners, but there is potentially some room there to make that a little bit lower. Depending on the complexity of the deal and everything else. So in regards to the trust, yes, you can consolidate multiple assets into the trust. Okay, so you can have some cryptocurrency, you can have a business sale, you can have some real estate, you can have an LP position, you can have LLC, you could have a limited partnership, you could have artwork, collectibles, public, private stock. You can have all these different things. And what's cool is the trust becomes kind of like the safe harbor. So upon exit, when the timing is right for you to exit those assets, you defer all the tax and the money starts to pool into one big trust on multiple promissory notes. And yes, you will pay the fees on those amounts that are coming in. And yes, as you get higher AUM, then our fees also start to come down, right? I'm just trying to use the higher amount based upon $1 million deal. So all of these things are a nice way to consolidate and then be able to redeploy capital, perhaps in a bigger down payment. If you have 5 or 6 assets, you want to consolidate all the capital and have a huge down payment to go buy one bigger deal. That's a good way to do it.
So I feel like we should kind of wrap things up here on a nice bow. So what would you want to share with people in closing, kind of about your experience, about anything else that you feel like hasn't been shared yet?
So I can't really speak of from the side of things that maybe Shea can, from already completing the DST and having that process already completed. But from a operator's perspective, obviously we have a group called passiveinvesting.com, and we've accepted, I don't know how many, but I know we've worked together in several different transactions with some of his clients that have invested in some of our assets. And I can speak from that perspective and saying it's a pretty seamless process. I mean, it's just like any other investor that comes in, they fill out the forms, they sign them, they wire the money, and that's done. So it's a pretty simple process from the operator's perspective. So if any of you in here are operators or want to be operators, this is definitely somebody you want to be able to introduce yourself to see about maybe looking at some of the assets that you have to be able to have some of their funds come into.
Yeah, I think, like I said at the beginning, just make the calls, ask the questions, connect with Brett. He'll put you in contact with, people that would make sense kind of in your niche or world to kind of, vet it out. I think the other thing that's been helpful for me with my real estate development company, I'm in a mastermind group that Brett does every Friday at, I guess it's 12 o'clock Central, Tennessee time, where I'm hearing new people that are coming into the DST. And I mean, I'm still learning stuff all the time. So there's other avenues within the DST that have benefited my business.
Yeah, just final words. I just want to thank you guys for attending and being open-minded to something that feels like it's too good to be true. And I was literally sitting at Marcus O'Malley Chap in 2009 as my business partners presenting in our office going, this guy's talking about Netflix. It seems like it's too good to be true. We thought we were the Navy SEALs of investment real estate. And it began the journey of testing it out. And I'm really the tortoise. I'm not the hare. I can talk fast and move now with what I know. But in the beginning, I'm like, I don't know anything about this. I'm going to start testing it out, and I'm going to start talking to CPAs, talking to my clients, and that began the journey of watching the tax attorney, and I liken it to a surgeon, 10,000 hours watching him do the surgeries, watching him assess, watching him overcome those objections and those questions from those CPAs. So I would encourage you to bring in your trusted advisor, have them on the call with us, and answer the questions so you can feel good about it. But realize that you want to plan your exit plan before you exit. Because when you squeeze time and tax and all this new stuff with your CPA and yourself, it's going to be a lot for you for emotionally to be like, yeah, I'm going to trust my biggest sale perhaps and my family legacy was something that my CPA has never heard of, and I'm going to do it all in the next 3 weeks. I mean, we did a deal in 4 weeks here for a client out of Texas. We just closed a $15 million deal. Here's the key, though. He says, I watched hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of your YouTube and podcast for the last 6 months, but now I'm ready to go. So that's part of why we're trying to give you educational content. You can go to YouTube, you can join our mastermind, and you can explore this slowly so that your exit plan is planned, you feel confident, you feel good, you check that box off, and then you list the property, then you sell the asset, right? Don't combine them in two, try to separate them. Although if you have one going, we are happy to help. That's part of why we love what we do. I played basketball growing up and football, played basketball in college. I love the ability to work with people, work with other professionals, as well as deliver on tight time crunches, right? That's what we do every day. So.
So one last thing I'll say is that, I never have felt pressured by Brett to make a decision. So he's followed up with me just because he knows my timeline for the business, but I never have felt like you were trying to like ram it down my throat, right? I mean, we spend, like I said, hours and hours on phone calls with my professionals and his entire team. And I mean, I was surprised that we were able to get all the amazing professionals on one phone call to actually dissect this thing.
Have
But
you paid $1 yet?
No, nothing. We haven't paid anything just yet. So I know it'll come, but right now we have not done that. But what I was trying to say is that don't feel pressured to reach out to him and say, hey, I want to understand this further. This is what I'm going through. Talk through your situation, because he definitely has a gift of being able to kind of teach and educate, even though it might take 2 or 3 times for somebody like myself. But eventually you'll get it. And as long as you bring on your own trusted advisors to also verify what he's actually saying to make sure it's legitimate, then you'll be more comfortable with it. But even once they say yes, he's not going to pressure you, right? That's one of the things I appreciate about Brett and his team.
Thanks, Dan. It means a lot. And thanks, Shea. It means a lot.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for coming out. It was great being able to spend some time with you, and we'll see you at the rest of the conference.
Thanks.
That's all.